So today it fell to me to do the opening address and the overview for the first day. And I would like to start by asserting that we all grow up with specific beliefs and rule systems. And these are handed to us by our families, our friends, our communities. And while these may be helpful to us as children trying to understand the world, when we grow up and become adults and try to problem solve and make positive impact, sometimes the rules and systems we grew up with don't necessarily provide the best solutions for us. And therefore today I would like to invite all of you, Adelina and I would like to invite all of you, to think about our world in a sustainable lens. We want to frame this in the way of opportunities, so new opportunities in particular. And new opportunities, there are many. For example, with emerging technologies which allow us to do more sequencing, to measure our genomics and other biological data about ourselves to drive towards a vision of personalized healthcare. And today we will see that in our panel discussion with the quantified self and also with our keynote from Chris Wigley, CEO of Genomics England. But of course, there are innovations and opportunities beyond the field of healthcare. And today we're going to see that in two particular keynotes, one from Birgit and Leoden, who has a very unique title, founder and chief mermaid of the Ocean Opportunity Laboratory. And she is establishing a global ecosystem where innovators in the ocean and renewable energies can come together and share resources. On a more personal level, we're also going to hear from Paula Dowdy, from Illumina. Paula is the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Illumina EMEA. And she's going to give us a talk about how we can innovate and create and really contribute positive impact. So there are several new opportunities, several things to look to in the future, but of course, we cannot look to the future if we don't look back on our past as well. And today we would also like to invite you to think about missed opportunities, particularly in regards to two different fields. The first is with our Rethinking Food and the Environment panel. Population growth has been a topic of debate for centuries, and still we haven't really solved this problem of bringing up food production in a sustainable way to meet population growth. So this is what we'll see in the panel discussion. Can we increase food production to match population growth, but in a way that preserves our need to protect our environment? We also want to highlight the pandemics of today and tomorrow, not least because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has changed all of our lives and has been around for really 2 years, 3 years, depending on who you're asking. But we would also like to talk about pandemics that are ongoing, even before COVID came to the forefront. Pandemics like obesity, heart disease, mental illness. What have we done well in each of these pandemics? What can we do better? And what can we take forward to make the next pandemic a little bit better, or even better yet, to prevent it altogether? So I've spoken about new opportunities, past opportunities, but it's really in the present that I would like to leave all of us, because the present is where we can make a positive change and where we can celebrate what we've already done well. And really, with this, it's our immense pleasure to welcome Alan Hirzel, CEO of Abcam, to give an opening address and a keynote today about sustainability. So Alan has started working at Abcam in 2013. And has since taken over Jonathan Milner as the founder of Abcam and really scaled up the business. And today, Abcam is a global contributor to improving life science research and translation, and it provides better diagnostics to create a future of better healthcare and also a more sustainable planet. So please join us in welcoming Alan Hirzel to the stage.
Thank you, Vicki, and good morning, everyone. This morning, I dropped off my 8-year-old daughter to school for her first day, and I had forgotten just how exciting learning is for children. That sort of sense of curiosity that Adelina and Vicki were talking about a few moments ago. And so it's with great pleasure I'm here. I feel like this is my chance to learn as well. And I think I'm sharing in this community of people where we're all learning about what does it mean? What does sustainability mean? What is it that we have to do? What do we have to change in order to achieve some of the aspirational goals around sustainability? And this learning for me, just to make it perfectly clear to you, I am not standing in front of you as an expert. This learning is ongoing. In 2019, I had an investor conference, quite an important one for Abcam, where I was making the case that we should invest roughly $1 billion back into innovation in the company in order to drive and sustain our growth in the business. And there were like 4 hours of presentations to an audience slightly larger than this one. And at the end in the Q&A, someone asked me, well, how are you thinking about ESG for Abcam? Felt like I had totally prepared for the day, but I hadn't really prepared for that question. And part of it was, well, I thought, well, isn't it obvious? We're in life sciences. We contribute to a sustainable healthcare mission, and that's good enough, isn't it? Well, why are you asking me this question? And it was just a cold, stark reminder for me that I was insufficiently curious about what it really took to run and lead a sustainable enterprise and to have an understanding of what that meant. So today, what I hope to do is to talk a little bit about how I've been thinking about sustainability since then, and to raise some questions that have come up for us and share those with you in the event that those questions might be helpful as you work through the next few days of this conference, and equally share some of the things that we've been doing at Abcam and what we've learned. Now, I have assured the speakers group and the organizers that I am not going to use all the time this morning to speak, so there'll be a lot of time at the end I hope for questions, and I will do my best to either answer them or say interesting question. I hope you find the answer over the next few days. Okay. I find it difficult to talk about sustainability without defining terms. Let me start in this way. At least in terms of framing, I like to think of two aspects of the question of sustainability. And this gets right to the heart of why I was sitting there dumbfounded in 2019. There's absolutely, particularly in healthcare and life sciences, a point about what we do. What do organizations do? Why do we exist? What's our purpose? And in the life sciences, oftentimes that's easier, particularly if you're in direct patient care. But for all organizations, I believe you have to spend some time really thinking through what is the purpose of this group? Why do we exist? And is there a sustainability message in here that makes it easier for us to organize our strategy and approach on sustainability? I've shown a picture of a shoe here. And the shoe, for me, was interesting. So my father called me and he said, hey, look, I've got terrible backaches. I have to wear steel-toed shoes in my industrial environment that I work in, but they're all really heavy and they're awful. And I then had to go on a search for him to find shoes. Turns out there are very few companies that make very comfortable kind of running shoe styles with steel toes for industrial environments. But there are a couple companies, and I did find that. And it made me think about, okay, well, as a shoe company, there are plenty of them out there right now who are marketing almost quarterly kind of fashion statements about your shoes, and then boom, 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 throw those away and start a new one. But here, you can think about other organizations that could be thinking about, okay, my job really is to create a healthier workforce, a more protected workforce, and to give people the innovations that have made it possible for athletics to advance, make that more widely available to everyone. Now that might be a silly example, but one of the things I'm going to try and talk about today is the role of innovation in advancing sustainability. And here, even something as simple as the industrial safety shoe, as a innovation, has improved lives. It's improved lives and it's a more purposeful thing to say, I have made it possible for working class and industrial laborers to have access to comfortable, safe shoes. I can tell you as an employee of an organization, I'd much rather hear something about that and a mission than, hey, we flog shoes cheap and widely, and when they wear out, people throw them away and replace them. So I think as you're thinking about your own careers and organizations, where you go to work, finding purpose and meaning and alignment in what organizations do and how they contribute is a really important way that you can contribute, by going to organizations to help them build on an important purpose. Now, the problem I had, of course, in 2019 was I was just fixated on purpose and this idea and hadn't thought at all about this other thing, which I've now spent a little bit more time thinking about, and that is how organizations do things. And this, of course, is where a lot of opportunity exists in thinking through your contributions or deteriorations of the planet and contributions to CO2 loading, but also in diversity and inclusion, how you treat employees, just the ethics of how business is done, how you think about the social construct with society in fairness. All of these things can come to play. So these are the two aspects of sustainability. We think the first is a little bit easier in life sciences. The second tends to get a little bit more obsessive about CO2. I'd like to broaden that conversation a little bit today. Now, if we're going to make progress, one of the points I made earlier was we have to be able to sacrifice the ways that we've been doing, and of course, ways that we've been doing things. In other words, we have to bring innovation to both of these subjects. But lots of questions as we think about what do we do? Where do we even start? And I'm going to share a few of these. So the first is one that we started with. How well does our purpose actually contribute? And that one I think is pretty straightforward, but important, as we talked about. But then we start getting into tougher questions. What exactly are we measuring around sustainability? And how do you define what good is? Most of what I've encountered in looking at measuring sustainability progress, or ESG measures, is dictated now by a couple of rating agencies like Sustainalytics. They have 40 measures they evaluate organizations like mine on. They spend a lot of time talking about CO2. And they're interesting organizations. I think they have helped companies like mine and people like me pay attention to what's being measured. However, there are issues. For example, what is the agency here in that organization? So here we have Sustainalytics. They market their reports to asset managers. So they make money by selling reports that they set the standards for what gets measured and evaluate companies like ours. When we, as a company, get a rating that's not particularly good on something, they will then market to us how they can help provide consulting so that we can prove our performance on that rating. They're a business. All of these rating agencies are a business. Just like the S&P ratings were businesses that were evaluating debt in the 2008 financial crisis. They have a role, but I don't think it's wise to solely let profit-driven businesses establish what are the ratings and measures for sustainability. You then have governments and policymakers trying to set their own measures for what sustainability means. And that's laudable because that gets rid of some of the profit motive agency issues I just described. However, there are no standards when every country in the world or every economic region decides to set their own standards. And for organizations like ours that are global, that's a real challenge. Which measures am I complying with, and how do I make sure I satisfy all of those in a way that is consistent with how we need to run our business to satisfy all of our stakeholders? And finally, coming back to CO2 loading, one of the things that personally I find objectionable is the greenwashing that goes on around CO2 and the story about sustainability being driven entirely around carbon neutral. So if you're a very profitable company, one organization I worked for before I came to Abcam, professional service firm, extremely high profit margins. Most of its carbon dioxide loading in the world comes from travel, has claimed that it's carbon neutral and is marketing that extensively. Now, I can assure you they have not stopped flying. They're still flying around the world. But they're paying for offsets that allow them to establish that they've achieved their carbon net neutral by well before 2030. I have real issues with that as a solution for sustainability. Because, not just because they're paying and that somehow doesn't get to root cause, but that it favors larger, more profitable companies to make that claim. Because the larger, more profitable organization can always pay to make their carbon dioxide problem disappear. So I think there are lots of things to consider when evaluating what exactly are we measuring and who's setting the standard of what good is. For an individual organization, in that sea of 50 things that one organization might be evaluated on by a rating agency or your own board of directors or your own management team or even the thousands of employees who work for you worldwide, because I get ideas all the time about things that we should work on. How do you prioritize? So I get tons of questions about, why are we buying these? Why are we buying this paper from an organization that doesn't have a good CO2 rating? And that's one of 10,000 or 20,000 things that we could work on. So you have to figure out a way of what are you going to prioritize where you go, because you can't do 10,000 things as an organization. You can do 2 or 3 each year that have a material impact. So thinking about strategically, how am I going to allocate my assets to what's most important so that I can actually make a difference is critical part of the question. One more thing that we've been thinking a lot about is time frame. So we have an epoch now, I think, that's finally been recognized that human beings are having an impact on the planet and how the planet evolves. That has been taking place for anywhere from 2,000 to 40 or 50,000 years, depending on how long you want to say humans have been actually making an impact on the planet. Extraordinary timescales. And trying to figure out what was cause and effect and the lag between what did human beings do and what impact did that have, I think we could spend a lot of time debating and arguing that. But let's assert for the moment that we are having an impact on the planet. So there's a lot of alignment then to do something about that. And here's where we run into timescale issues. 2030, I think when I first heard people talking about 2030 as an objective for the climate change net neutral, it sounded like a long way out. I can tell you right now, it seems like it's right around the corner. Like I'm seriously concerned about what it is we're going to do as an organization and our suppliers and the world network that we work in that gets us to 2030 commitments. And yet that seems a long way away. Even that's not as short as some other things then, so that are working here. So people like me, leaders of companies, typical tenure would be 3 to 5 years. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes a little bit longer, but that's a very typical tenure. So you're asking executives or leaders in organizations to deal with a problem that's been underway for hundreds, if not tens of thousands of years, to sign up to goals that are well beyond their normal tenure for their organization when they're getting measured in terms of their performance quarterly. Real issues then in figuring out how do you get organizations worldwide and leaders worldwide to focus on actually doing something in the short term that has long-term benefits that can be carried on. And that leads to the question about incentives. My incentives, personally, my financial incentives for leading an organization are, at best, 3 to 4 years. I have incentives that help me lead a company sustainably around that frame. And then quite a few of them around annual or quarterly performance. That's pretty typical. Actually, the 3 to 4 years thing is pretty unique in my position. A lot of them are annual or quarterly. So if you're thinking about commercial enterprises and incentives, and some of you are going to be on board someday and be innovating how we create incentive structure for people to act in the benefit of the long term, even when their self-interest is short term, that's a real challenge and a question that has to be dealt with. And I wish I had answers for you on all these, but I raise these questions because I think they're important and there are no easy answers. Let me talk for a moment about Abcam. The introduction was helpful, so thank you. I'm not going to duplicate that. Abcam's a small business in the life sciences. We have about 1,800 employees who work worldwide. And whilst we were started here in Cambridge on Tennis Court Road in the old mortuary of the University of Cambridge Hospital, we now have 95% of our business outside the United Kingdom. So we really are a global company. And so we have all of the agenda of global company sustainability issues with a relatively small business in the life sciences. You know, our market cap's, what, 3 billion pounds? That's amazing. I love it. It's fantastic. But compared to Thermo Fisher and Illumina and other organizations, Roche that you're going to meet, you know, we're a tiny speck. And that's important as we're thinking about what is our real role? How can we make a difference? So the way we try to make a difference is we sell this tiny little product. Typical product we sell is about 100 microliters of a fluid that has biological material in it, typically antibodies, but can be recombinant proteins and other things, that help scientists who are in the discovery mission do 5 to 10 experiments. And we do thousands of those dispatches every day around the world. And our hope is not just to make that individual scientist more productive by getting them what they need faster and to have it perform better in their hands, but to make it so good that their work is reproducible. And we probably have spent more time thinking about that and as our contribution to society and sustainability than anything else. When I came to the business in 2013, the mission of the company was to have the world's largest catalog of antibodies. And I said and then by extension, other products. And I said to Jonathan, the founder, Jonathan, that's an amazing purpose. I'm sorry, there are going to be other companies that can do that. And by the way, it has no meaning or purpose. So being largest doesn't matter. Being the company that scientists can count on, that they can put their career behind and trust, and that funders like the NIH or Horizon or UKRI can fund and know that by funding that work, someone else is going to be able to reproduce it. And by extension, it can go into translational biology and then into clinics and make a difference without having to redo the work. That matters. So that's what we've been focused on. Be that company that can help individual researchers be more productive, get to their results faster, achieve their mission better, and to make sure that that's extendable throughout the whole life cycle from 20 years before a clinical moment at that first discovery all the way through to the translational and clinical, that the molecules and the things that we sell make the whole journey. So that's what we do. And everybody at our company, I think, could talk about the purpose of that business in a way that means something to them, that contributes to society, and it's a powerful part of our culture. In a way that being the biggest never was going to be, or selling the most, or having the biggest catalog. And that still allows us to grow. That purpose allows us to grow, because then we're talking about, well, the reason why we're growing, why do we aspire to grow and achieve financial outcomes that we talk about? It's because we think we're going to have a greater impact on science and to make the whole of the scientific enterprise worldwide more productive. In 2013-14, there was a paper published by Abcam that said 50% of research was irreproducible, mostly because of reagent quality being poor. That gripped me. I thought, this is something we could work on. If we could make that number go down by 10% or by 25%, or to reduce, to basically improve the productivity of the entire discovery world, that is something meaningful. And that's what we're trying to do. So that's us. How we do things. We've tried to have our own answers to some of those questions. So we have focused on the UN sustainability measures, and we have picked 6 of them where we think we can make an real impact, and we've added 2 more where we think we're going to make a go of it, but we're not so sure. We can make a difference. And because those sustainability measures that the UN has set out cut across things that we're doing in our strategy, we've aligned what we're doing on each of those to our product strategy, what we're doing for our people and our organization, our partners that we work with worldwide, and, of course, planet. So we've given ourselves some organizing framework for making a contribution to sustainability goals that the UN has set in a way that aligns to our strategy and what we were going to do anyway. I think that's really important. I feel strongly that sustainability cannot be a separate operational goal. It actually has to be integrated in what we were going to do anyway. It might give us different measures, but we are committed to having a diverse and inclusive organization. We are committed to making products that have an impact on human health. We are committed to reducing our carbon dioxide and waste contributions to the planet. We are committed to working through our partners to help them be more effective in their own missions around sustainability. So that's how we've approached this thing. We try and measure things beyond carbon dioxide. That's difficult. There aren't measures for everything. I'll come back to a moment in an organization that does seem to be tracking these UN sustainability goals. Has been helpful for us to learn from. But even on CO2, it's what's the right measure? Is it per capita, per employee, per product shipped, total contribution, all those things? I want to come back to that question we said earlier. Then, I have 1,800 people, all creative, energetic, mostly young people, constantly giving up ideas on what we can do. And one of the ones I hear quite frequently is, hey, we should reduce the carbon impact of our packaging. And we are doing that because it's outrageous. If you buy a product from Abcam, which is about this big, it comes in a box that's this big with an ice pack in it, and then in another box this big with more ice packs in it. It's ridiculous, right? And then it gets shipped overnight. Even when you add up all of the issues that has for the planet, it pales in comparison with the CO2 loading that comes from us shipping products internally from one location to another. So I have 13 locations around the world. I ship stuff all the time from here to there. I have a really inefficient supply chain. Actually, that's bad for our economics, it's bad for our customers, and it also happens to be bad for the planet. That's really the priority to fix. How do we keep stock and inventory in the right places? And that's more important than the obvious visual thing that you can see around packaging. It's not to say that big packaging isn't important, but if we got to pick the things that we as a small company can do, that's how we think about picking. We actually need data to help us figure out what's scale problem and what can we actually fix. Now, here's some things I thought I'd share that we've learned. The first is we appreciate that we're really lucky, that what we do, we believe, is inherently good. And we've started to get much clearer about what that means and how do we evaluate it in terms of quality, consistency, papers, translations of research into translational medicine and clinical impact, a whole bunch of easy ways for us to get on that, and we think that's good. So that's amazing, and it's very satisfying. Absolutely feel that was the right thing to do. Improving how we do things is super challenging. Like, it's just really hard work. And part of it is this long-term view. Most of what we're going to do in the company to change anything probably won't have an environmental or social impact for a decade. Like, for example, I'm a white, middle-class American biotech executive. Not very diverse. If I want to make progress on the gender pay gap or on diversity and inclusion, yes, I can make progress. But until I leave, Abcam's progress on that particular measure from a senior executive standpoint is poor. So they say, okay, fine, let's build a pipeline of leaders who are more diverse and inclusive so that we've got a future pipeline of leaders who can solve that problem over time. And then you run into, well, how much social mobility is there in science? How many people from working class or impoverished backgrounds actually get into science, and that you could get that kind of diversity in the organization? Well, it turns out it's like 5% of the world's population in life science education comes from that kind of background. So then we say, okay, fine, let's get involved with all these organizations that are going to get kids exposed to STEM education. Well, that's a 25-year journey. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We're definitely doing it. Or, how many people are there from ethnic minorities or multiracial backgrounds that are in life sciences? Again, you end up with like less than 20%. So some of these things are generational tasks that we have started on, but it's frustrating because you want to make more progress faster. So timescales, they require a long-term view, and you got to start now. Sustainability. So I think that it was a gift that I got that question in 2019 about how are you thinking about things, because it came from one of our shareholders, and it gave me the opportunity to make the case to our shareholders that what we were doing in our strategy, the things that we were prioritizing to build the company, like simplifying our supply chain, the investments we were making in doing that, or the investments we were making in product quality, that those inherently were going to make our owners and the asset managers who get measured now on ESG look better. And we're not talking about a separate sustainability program, that ESG is some separate thing. I can say legitimately that ESG is built in, the goals of ESG and what's being measured for asset managers is built into how we're running the company and what we're doing. So that's been helpful. More of a struggle, though, is our dependence on others. So I think our largest supplier in the company is probably Thermo Fisher, enormous company. It is also probably our biggest contributor to CO2 at Abcam. So 10% of the contribution Abcam makes to CO2 loading in the planet comes from activities Abcam did, about 10%. 90% comes from stuff that's coming in the door, consumables that we're using to make our products, packaging that comes in that we're using, supply chain issues, the accumulated CO2 load of all Abcam suppliers. I need Mark Casper and his executive team to take their carbon neutrality commitments seriously in order so that I can achieve the kind of goals I did. It's all interlinked. And so we need all of us, of course, to succeed, but we need the really big companies that are having the biggest impact to actually take this seriously and make progress and not just pay for the problem to go away by planting more trees in Brazil. So that, I think, has been really interesting to think about. And then the final point is just how motivating this agenda has been for our employees and the organization. I underestimated the amount of latent energy and creativity that existed in our organization that was, when released, was going to make a difference. So we've launched employee resource groups that are tackling diversity and inclusion issues, and it is incredible to have that kind of engagement with the teams worldwide. And I can assure you that talking about LGBT issues in China is an unusual experience for employees. But to use a global organization and a commitment to some of these objectives to make a difference in regions where this isn't even talked about as a topic has been deeply satisfying. I'll leave you with one other thing that we've learned, and that is that we have enormous hope and optimism about how to go forward. So I don't know how many of you have come across the book Enlightenment Now. Anybody read that book? A few of you? Look, I think despite an enormous amount of alarmism and despair in the world, there's evidence that we are making progress, that human ingenuity, drive, and energy applied to innovation on these areas that make a difference to sustainability or a better planet, that progress is being made. And in this book, and in the data sources that it uses, SDG Tracker for the UN Sustainability Goals and oneworldandData.org for a wide variety of measures like infant mortality and education, wealth building, all the things that you might consider. Progress is being made over decades. This particular chart I highlighted because it shows that there does not have to be a trade-off between improving the environment and economic productivity. And I really think that it's essential that we keep an optimistic view in mind, that we can solve these things. I think yesterday I read an article, someone was saying, it was reminding us that in the 1900s, if you've ever been to the east coast of the US, in the 1900s, slaughtering a whale for its oil was the way to make light. And if we carried on doing that, there would be no whales. And of course, we have found other innovative ways to make light and energy. We're in the midst of doing that with electricity now. I was actually shocked, pleasantly shocked to see that solar and wind power now generates more electricity than nuclear, which I guess maybe I will, as I said, we're all learning, but nuclear's had in my entire lifetime been the big kind of story about alternates to coal and gas. I'd always thought solar and wind were fantastic, but it was going to take another 50 years for them to get up to speed. It's been extraordinary. So, Schumpeter was right. Innovation is discontinuous. Economic progress is not long and linear. And that just fills me with enormous optimism that you, as a youth and leaders in the world, have the ability to make a difference, and that innovation and investment in innovation applied to the right areas can make a difference. And I leave you with that note of optimism as you go for the next 3 days into this. And I hope when I come to a GapSummit in future, I'll get to see the benefits of what you've done and the innovative contributions you've made. I'm happy to use the last 15 minutes for any questions you have. It's been my pleasure to have this opportunity to talk to you today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Alan, for an amazing talk. You are free to ask any questions for Alan, so please raise your hand and our team will bring over the mics. Can we please ask you to stand up and just briefly introduce yourself before asking your question? There you go. I can see a lot of hands already up.
Hi, I'm a PhD student in Cambridge, final year. Thank you for your presentation, very interesting. I have a question about the supply chain infrastructure behind Abcam. The reason for the question is that over the last couple of years, we have seen changes in the economy. When it comes to the supply chains, there's been very much a lot of difficulties in supplying companies like yours. And my concern as a leader of tomorrow is that these concerns, these difficulties can have an impact on CO2 loadings, particularly for companies like yours that have to deliver their products worldwide. So how does Abcam navigate those changes while trying to achieve those ESG commitments? And do you think that your vision can change as a result of those changes in the economy, or is there any other way that the company has figured out a way to achieve those goals in the face of these challenges?
It's a great question. Abcam specifically, I can talk about. I think we optimistically started with the idea that we have one global market. Scientists do science the same way everywhere. They have the same scientific needs, and therefore, from a product standpoint, product design standpoint, marketing standpoint, for the most part, it's a global enterprise. And therefore, we should organize our supply chain wherever it was expedient to do so. So we could produce in one place, mostly, and then ship worldwide. For reasons not explicitly linked to sustainability, that's turned out to be a bad idea, mostly for geopolitics. That, if anything, the last couple of years have taught us that it's too risky for us to have single-site production, global distribution. So we're now actually probably doing things that are counter to our sustainability goals in order to deal with geopolitics. And we're putting manufacturing capabilities of sufficient scale into North America, into Europe, and into Asia so that we can serve those markets without having to move products across those borders and deal with trade wars. It would have been more economically efficient and lower loading on CO2 to have single centers of excellence and ship once. Now we're going to be shipping more. So what we have to do then is we have to find out, okay, well, in the short term, what can we do to measure how much we move product and where we hold stock and what do we make where? So we've just finished a 5-year implementation of a new system to help us manage all that. So that's going to help us. But ultimately, to make a real difference, I need a whole new innovative way of delivering the product. And I think out there somewhere, probably 10 years out, we'll be able to do cell-free synthesis of biological materials on demand in a lab. So that if you need a protein or an antibody, it will be synthesized overnight for you in your lab, and I won't ship anything anywhere. I'll just send the recombinant signal encrypted to your lab, and it'll make it. That's what I'd like to do. And of course, that will get rid of all the shipping and all the packaging, and it'll be magnificent. But I need a lot of innovation to make that work. And that's, it's just another example that I think if you want to make a leapfrog difference, optimizing what you do today won't do it. It needs some real kind of new thinking about how to do things. Thank you.
Hi, Alan. My name's Max. I'm doing a mold bio PhD in Vienna, where we love your product.
Thank you.
And it's great to hear from you and to hear you talk about, how much you think about sustainability and the why and what, the how and what even, and also, about that gift of a question from your investor a few years back. My question, I guess, is when you talk about these things to your investors, and you gave this example of improving your supply chain and internal movement of products, how much do you still have to convince them that this is going to help the bottom line, which I guess in that case it will, and do you really have to kind of persuade them that this is going to give financial gain as well as helping the mission of sustainability, or are investors on your investor calls just elated to hear that this is another ESG initiative, and you said how kind of asset managers are ranked on that. I'm just kind of interested to hear what the sentiment is from your investors on topics like that.
For the last couple of years, I haven't had to persuade them at all. I think in this environment, and as we look ahead, I would not be surprised if some of them lose their nerve and ESG becomes slightly less important and making money for their pension fund performance or their personal performance matters more. And I've started to see this a little bit, right? If oil stocks start performing really well because of oil prices and the margins they're making, or energy stocks generally, it's going to be the brave asset manager that says, no, I'm not going to make that money for my clients and my grannies who are in pension funds because that's not a good ESG thing. I think we're going to see people lose their nerve and go back to their native state of, I'm here to make money. So, I guess the optimism in me says that this has gone far enough, that the measures are important enough, that there'll be enough critical mass to carry on, but I think we're going to see some backsliding over the next few years.
Hi, I'm Milena. I work in emerging technologies at the Food Standards Agency. I had a couple of quick questions. First, talking about standards at the start, you were kind of talking about how there's no global standard for sustainability. And thinking about that, I was thinking, like, would it be helpful if, say, that was something on the table at a COP, that we create some kind of global list of standards that everyone follows? But then, is there an issue around kind of what measures matter where? So you can say, like, X amount of water, X amount of plastic, X amount of greenhouse emissions is like what every product should be aiming to, what we should be aiming towards. But if you're creating a product that's really water intensive in an area that's really water rich, that matters a lot less than if you're producing it in an area that's really water poor. And that kind of works for land use and all these other measures. So how do we take that into account if we want a global measure? And is that something that kind of you're thinking about? And then second question was around your last slide. All of those were high income countries. How do those graphs look in low and middle income countries in terms of growth and sustainability?
Yeah, okay. Well, look, I'll take any help or support to find global consistency on measures and compliance from a regulatory standpoint for sustainability or environmental measures. So I think that's quite a difficult challenge. It's helpful that the UN has made an attempt, and they have fantastic measures on that tracker that you can look at. But for exactly the reasons you're talking about, every economy may have different objectives about what it's trying to maximize and improve, and therefore its incentives are to come up with a different set of standards or measures of what good is. So I think it's quite a difficult problem to tackle, but one I would encourage you to carry on and see if you can do it. And then your point about economies, yes, of course, it is a luxury of wealthy economies to be able to invest in innovations at the level they are that put it there. My point was more just like the shoe innovation, part of what we want leading high-income industrialized countries to do is to innovate so that the rest of the world can benefit. And that kind of extension and sharing of innovation from these markets that have shown how to do it, I think is what we could hope for. It is totally legitimate that economies that don't have the economic surplus to generate those, to lean into those trade-offs or to make them not trade-offs, it's understandable they make different choices. I think you'll actually be surprised as you look through economies how many that relationship stands true for, and I would encourage you to have a look at those.
Hello, my name is Joella and I am a PhD student at Dartmouth College. What you said about rotation of directors of companies, that they are short-term, not long enough to reach to that model, kind of standing still with me, because you don't really think of that when you are on the other side unless you have to do it. And that's not only for leaders of companies, for leaders of government as well. They also rotate. So, but that can change, right? We can change what criteria we evaluate them. And as we stand right now as consumers or as citizens, what can we do to ask for that? Because every company has to satisfy their consumers, every government has to satisfy their people. But we have to change our mentality first, and where should we start on that?
What a great question. And I don't have an answer. You can try things like, I think the first thing you could try is to make sure that governance bodies that are looking after longer term, in my case, the board of directors, have taken seriously the input from customers, employees, shareholders, that you want a longer term view. I think it starts with them because the board for public companies represents the interests of those stakeholders and holds management accountable for a longer term view. And they do it for strategy, like there's sort of a well-worn path of, okay, I need long-term economic value, therefore I'm gonna, as a board of directors, make sure management doesn't take short-term actions that inhibit that long-term gain. That is not a mechanism that is without failure. There's plenty of organizations that have violated that. But you could take some lessons from how have companies steered towards long-term value creation from an economic value, and can I apply some of those lessons around long-term sustainability measures? Again, super difficult, long-term change effort, but that's probably an important course to take. In addition to that, for branded companies, they watch social media and brand reactions really quickly. So I can tell you, every time somebody complains about our packaging on Twitter, I'm looking at it and I see it and I know about it. And so I think keeping up the consumer power of really making sure that you're vocal about brands you support and things that you want and brands that you don't, that works, particularly in today's hyper-connected digital world. Beyond that, I'm reluctant to see more kind of punitive regulated controls because I'm more of a kind of nudge incentives economist mentality than rules and punishments, mostly because I think creative humans find ways around rules and punishments. So I would just, I can imagine, for example, you could say, all right, I'm going to come up with a clawback mechanism for all payments that executives have ever had, where if they don't achieve their 2030 goals in the company, even if they've left, I'm going to make sure that they're personally liable to pay that off. There will be clever lawyers and other people who find ways around that. So, yeah, I'm sure somebody will try, but I'd rather we kind of use more carrot.
Hi, my name is Reza. I'm a medical student and a startup founder. Thank you for your talk. I just had a question, and you touched upon it earlier. How important do you think government regulations and government input would be or have been in helping deliver more sustainable business and helping drive companies towards a more sustainable future?
Yes, it has to be important. There are places where the interests of the common, the nation, the economy that the government's serving outweighs the economic interest of the company. And, for example, if you're dealing with a global company and there's some very specific thing around UK environment or UK, the only way you're really going to get their attention is by UK national government action or regulatory action. However, the more individual countries operate in their own interests, the more costly it's going to be for consumers in the end. So I think we need some coalition around global framework like the UN Sustainability Goals, and to make those national regulations an exception more than the rule. Otherwise, the cost of that is going to be high, and it's just going to get passed on to everybody else.
But don't you think the cost of the climate crisis outweighs that?
It does, but I guess my point is, rather than national action around regulations, I'd rather see more global coordination of regulation so that we've got one global framework. But either way, yeah, governments have a role to play. Now, being reminded, we've unfortunately run out of time. Again, my enormous pleasure to be here today. I engaged in this week with the spirit of curiosity and learning, and I thank you for your time and questions.